And we have got to have lunch, and the first taxis, as you heard, leave at 2:30 for the airport. So that means we have to finish this session, including time for the brief conference summary, which means the speakers have no more than 12 minutes each, and that includes myself. So I'm assuming that if I'm a dictator on 4 speakers, I'm going to have 4 speakers ganging up on me when I speak. So, right. So without any further ado, let me simply ask Eugene Chausovsky, the Eurasia analyst at Stratfor, if he would like to kick off.
Sure.
That Eugene got. Is over that. Thank you.
Well, I'll try to keep mine very short. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you to the conference organizers. This has been a very interesting discussion, and I've really enjoyed all of the speakers and the various panels. So, as Mr. Roberts said, I represent Stratfor. I'm a senior Eurasia analyst there. It's based in Austin, Texas. So get kind of an American perspective on things, if you will. And there's been so many interesting and informative presentations that have kind of touched on a lot of technical issues. So on the various pipeline projects and various challenges, security and otherwise, that I thought I'd kind of go about it a different way after hearing everybody's presentations and kind of maybe take a very high-level geopolitical perspective and maybe a forward-looking approach as well. So here we have a map of Eurasia, or the former Soviet states. And I'll be going back to this slide. Here we have kind of organized it by basically the foreign policy orientation of the former Soviet countries as they stand right now. And as I mentioned, I'll be going back here shortly. And here's another map, which I think is a little bit of a different perspective on things that I thought would be a good place to start, essentially. And we've been talking a lot about the southern corridor. We've been talking about Eastern Europe, the Baltic states. I think the elephant in the room here is Russia. Obviously, a lot of these energy diversification projects and all of these different initiatives, in one way or another, have a relation to Russia. And so I think it's notable here. This map is an inverted map. It's a little bit old, but I think it still has a lot of relevance as to how Russia looks at its neighborhood. And as you can see here, I think you have to start with geography when talking about energy security risks. So I think one notable feature of Russia in a geopolitical sense is it's a very large country, obviously, but it's one that doesn't have many geographic barriers between it and its neighbors. So you can see here, well, it looks to the east, but it's actually to its west, Eastern Europe. It's essentially flat. You have the northern European plains, so that leaves the Baltic states, Poland, going all the way to Germany and to France, wide open. You have the Carpathian Mountains, but that also leaves Ukraine and Belarus exposed. If you look north, or again from Russia's direction, it's to the south, the Caucasus, you do have the Caucasus Mountains, but those are not impenetrable, as we've seen throughout history. So essentially, it's only when you get to Turkey and Iran that you have real geographic barriers in the form of mountains for Russia. And same goes in Central Asia. Very much open space there. So I think it's no coincidence then that Russia looks at its neighborhood in a very sort of suspicious or from a point of insecurity. That has manifested in what is looked at as aggressive behavior, but I think it's Russia's insecurity that should be really acknowledged in order to not to agree with what Russia has been doing, but to understand some of its actions. And you can take that, going back in history, whether it's the Mongol invasion or whether it's Napoleon, Nazi Germany, Russia does have historical reasons to be suspicious of its neighborhood, or at least to feel threatened. And unfortunately, what that means for the former Soviet states of Eurasia is that Russia looks to them as essentially buffer states. Absent geographic barriers, what Russia looks for is space, is just sheer space to protect it from what it considers its enemies or its adversaries throughout the Eurasian landmass. So what Russia has done essentially, again, throughout history, but it applies very much in the current day, is use, I can go a little bit here, so energy is a very good example. Russia, obviously a major energy producer, major exporter, and a lot of these pipelines go through the former Soviet states to markets in Europe and elsewhere. And this, Russia's status as an energy exporter, sort of plays into its levers of influence. So when Russia tries to establish a presence, or at least influence in these buffer states, going back here, there's many avenues for Russia to do so. So one of these is energy. And essentially, if we look at Russia's goals from a higher level perspective, it's not necessarily to make life difficult for these countries. But essentially, what Russia is trying to do is, again, establish that buffer territory, keep other powers out of what it considers its sphere of privileged interests. And there's a number, as I mentioned, there's a number of levers that Russia does, that Russia pursues in that goal. So energy, this is the theme of this conference, and that's something that I'll be really emphasizing. Because so many of these countries have been, if you look at the Baltic states, Ukraine, these countries have historically been dependent on Russia for energy, and we've seen some of the energy diversification efforts that they've taken to wean themselves off of that. But still, I think a big driver of that is how Russia has used energy as a political tool. So we've seen that in the form of natural gas cutoffs. We saw that in Ukraine, both in 2006 and 2009. We've seen it in the Baltic states as well. Even countries that are not pro-Western, such as Belarus or even Turkmenistan, have faced pipeline disruptions or natural gas cutoffs from Russia. That's not the only thing. Russia also has pursued essentially a politically motivated pricing mechanism. So if we see, going back several years, before Lithuania had its LNG import terminal, it was paying the highest price for natural gas in Europe. Ukraine also has been a very good example of how Russia has used pricing as a political tool, because you saw under the Orange administration, going back several years to Yushchenko, Ukraine was paying very high prices for Russian natural gas. Then you had Yanukovych come in as president, and he signed a Black Sea fleet deal with Russia to extend the naval presence in Crimea, and all of a sudden gas prices were reduced by a significant margin. And then you had the Euromaidan revolution, and gas prices went up again. So that there's clearly a pattern there in terms of the pricing. But energy is just one aspect of Russia's leverage in Eurasia. You also have the political aspect. So Russia has ties into various political parties and various political personalities throughout Eurasia. And it has used that as sort of as a way to manipulate different policies, or at least to extract leverage there. And breakaway territories have also been a very important aspect for Russian influence. So I can go back to this first slide here, and I think if you look at, as I mentioned, going back to the foreign policy orientation of some of these countries. So you have Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, the Baltic states, as Western-leaning, pro-Western countries. Obviously, they're in the EU and NATO. You also have Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, which have more recently, but still in a very significant way, pursued Western integration. I don't think it's a coincidence that these countries that have a Western orientation have difficulties with breakaway territories. So you have Transnistria in Moldova that has been a big asset for Russia in terms of having a military presence so close to Moldovan territory. Georgia, obviously, with Abkhazia and South Ossetia, has been a problem. And more recently, Ukraine, which is essentially has witnessed the latest breakaway territory appear in its country in the form of Donbass. I mean, Crimea is a separate situation because Russia has annexed that. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the countries that have breakaway territories also happen to be Western leaning. So that's clearly an avenue that Russia uses to, if it can't push Western influence out of these countries, it uses these territories to sort of undermine them from within. Now, another lever for Russia has quite obviously been security or military. So again, countries that have pursued Western integration since the collapse of the Soviet Union have experienced some significant military problems as it relates to Russia. So 2008 was a very good example of this with the Russia-Georgia war, quite clearly tied into Georgia's pursuit of integration with NATO and the EU, and that was meant to send a message essentially to not only Georgia but to the West that Russia was very serious about having countries in its neighborhood really think twice about pursuing Western integration. And more recently, we've seen how that's played out in Ukraine. Following the Euromaidan revolution, the government flips to be pro-Western, and then you have the Crimean annexation, and now the ongoing military conflict in eastern Ukraine. So, and I already mentioned the energy networks there. So this brings me to the topic of this presentation, which is regional cooperation. And obviously, I don't want to spend too much time on this because you all have mentioned it in much better detail than I can give. But energy integration has been a key aspect of regional cooperation as a means to defend these countries, or at least to give them some breathing room from Russian influence. Now, I already talked about how Russia had used energy as a political tool, and so I think that there's been some pretty big strides, especially in recent years, to sort of buffer these countries from Russian influence via energy. So what we've talked about, regional pipeline projects, obviously the Southern Corridor being a very important one, and more recently the LNG import terminals, which has been really pioneered, I think, by the Baltic states, Lithuania especially, but also Poland now has its import terminal. And not only the import terminal, but the pipeline interconnectors have been a very important aspect in terms of making sure that those new sources of gas can be spread out in that region. And that, I think, again, the Baltics have been really the pioneers of that in Eurasia. In addition to that, reverse flow supplies has been a really important aspect for Ukraine. So yesterday, I believe it was mentioned that Ukraine has made some really big strides just in the last 2 to 3 years in terms of diversifying or weakening Russia's use of energy in its country. So prior to Euromaidan, Ukraine was importing the vast majority of its supplies from Russia directly via piped gas. And that was a very problematic political issue for Ukraine because of the way that Russia was able to essentially use that to its advantage. Now it has access to reverse flow supplies from countries like Hungary, Slovakia, Romania. That's still, technically speaking, it's still Russian gas, but they're importing it from different suppliers, and that basically gives them more leverage in negotiations. And then you have other things like joint electricity grids. So these countries, the pro-Western countries in Eurasia, have really taken a lot of strides to weaken Russia's use of energy as a tool. And I think that's reflected in the negotiations that we've seen. Countries are now paying lower prices for Russian gas. The contracts are much more favorable. And really, it's become a lot more commercialized of a relationship than it has been before. Not completely. There's still some political undertones there, of course, but they've really made a lot of strides. But I just wanted to highlight that, as we talk about regional cooperation, energy is not the only form. And I think it comes in sort of a package because there's also been a lot of economic cooperation happening. If you look at, for example, the wider Baltic corridor and in the Southern corridor as well, these countries are trading much more with each other. The infrastructure links are improving, especially as we've seen Russia come under a sanctions regime from the West, from the US and the EU. it's enacted its own counter sanctions, which has forced these countries to look towards other markets and including each other. And we can't separate security cooperation as well. So we've talked so much about Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey as an important energy corridor. But just as energy ties have increased, there's been a concurrent security relationship that I think has been strengthened over the last few years. So we see that in the form of military exercises, in forms of training, and a similar process is taking place, albeit at an earlier stage, between Poland, Lithuania, and Ukraine, which now that it's looking more to the west, Poland and Lithuania are sort of natural allies for Ukraine to look to in terms of security partners. And here, as I mentioned, this is just the map of the southern corridor. And so, okay, what does that mean for as we look ahead? We've talked so much about the efforts already underway. What does regional cooperation in energy, but also in other areas, look like in the coming years? Well, I think to determine that, we have to look at the drivers of regional cooperation. Okay, just my last point. When we look at it, we have to take in a few factors into consideration. Russia is facing growing challenges in the future, both because of its economy is coming under pressure. Politically, there's a lot of uncertainty there. And also, we have to factor in uncertainty in the West with the new administration in the US. We've seen the EU come under a lot of pressure because of Brexit and now these recent elections that we've seen. And then also demographic shifts in Eurasia, which I'll just briefly highlight. Population change in the coming, okay, so, all right, I can conclude there, so thank you.
Prospects for electricity trade and transit in South Caucasus. Georgi Chikovani of the energy and water component of the Delete with Deloitte, the G4G project, is going to be talking. And of course, here we have a very interesting intermixture of Georgian and Russian interests, involvement.
I represent USAID's project G4G. We support Georgian government in implementing various reforms in many sectors, and one of our major focus is reform in the electricity sector of Georgia. Today, I will be touching, my presentation will be more technical. I won't be touching any geopolitical issues, which we all know is very important in energy, in regional energy trade. Although, as I want to explain to you guys, we think that having commercial and financial interests in the Caucasus in energy trading is also key, and it could be that commercial issues will be driving the political decisions in this region. USAID supports Georgian policy in energy, and Georgian energy policy includes increasing energy security through construction and development of hydropower resources, which is available in Georgia. We have abundant resources, and the utilization of these resources will increase our energy security. This is first issue, and second one is regional trading will also contribute to increase of energy security. I will briefly explain what we've done so far. We are working from 2010, and USAID has assisted Georgia in developing pre-feasibility studies of these hydropower plants. We've contacted more than 500 investors, individuals, also institutions. We promoted investments in hydropower, and so far we were successful. Memorandums for construction new hydropower plants has been signed. Our target was 400 megawatts, and more than 543 megawatts of memorandums has been signed with Georgia, and they are in the phase of development. This was first project. Second project started in 2012, and what we find out when we dealt with so many investors is that we have a facility, we have very good technical feasibility studies, we have good sites for hydropower plant development. Government, with the help of EBRD and IFC and KfW, has constructed interconnector with Turkey, 500/400 kV back-to-back station. And it seems that everything is in place. But unfortunately, this is not enough. If you construct line, it doesn't mean that you will have a trade instantly, because there are a number of mechanisms which should be in place. Europe and Turkey, which is more harmonized with Europe, have a competitive market with its own rules, with its very complicated mechanisms. Georgia is still very far behind, so in order for Georgian developers and investors to trade in Turkish market, there was a need to implement the reforms also in Georgia to be harmonized. It's like if you bring football to a rugby game, you cannot really play rugby. So we had to adjust to the European and Turkish market. So what we developed, it's called Georgian electricity market model, and we try to implement, and we are still in the process of implementing this electricity trading mechanism. This electricity market model is harmonized with EU legislation, with EU directives. I won't go to details of all these aspects, but it's fully harmonized with EU energy directives, and also with Turkish electricity market rules and regulations. Just to give you how complex is this reform, I won't go to details, but I will highlight that through 2012, these are the major milestones and accomplishments that has been done towards implementing this new electricity market model. The biggest one was the starting point was agreement between Georgia and Turkey on electricity trading. There have been a number of other agreements signed between Georgian transmission system operator and Turkish transmission system operator. Trading has started already since this line went in force, although we see that there are much more opportunities which could be utilized, and if we have this mechanism in place in Georgia and agreement with Turkey, this could be exploited furthermore. Sorry. Just to give you status of our reform, in green we see that this activities has been already implemented and successfully implemented. Yellow color represents activities that our project G4G is focused right now, and the red one it still needs to be developed in upcoming years. So what will be the result of our market opening? We will have increased security of supply, not only from local resources, but also with regional resources, because integrated in regional resource, of course, increase our capacity. And as we've seen in the world competition, always have downward pressure toward prices and increased quality of supply. I won't go to details. We also started simulation of Georgian market. We are basically proposing to have partially deregulated market with competitive prices, and also partially regulated market for households and for small businesses, which is very sensitive for Georgian market. We identified many problematic issues with this market opening and implementing this new mechanism. So I won't go to details. One of them is Abkhazia and Guri, and Georgia needs to work very closely with Abkhazia and our brothers and partners, because this is very politically sensitive issue. But this is a strong energy tie with Abkhazia, and we see that energy diplomacy could play a significant role in our region. Our aim is to eventually couple our market with Turkish market. We have an intergovernmental agreement between Georgian and Turkish energy ministers to cooperate, to have harmonize our markets, and this is one of the options that we can have market coupling with Turkey, which is mutually beneficial for both countries and which could increase dramatically the volume of trading between our countries. Also with Armenia, we are working, USAID supports Armenian electricity sector to harmonize its legislation with Georgia, and by harmonizing and by maybe coupling Georgian and Armenian market, we could have stronger ties, regional ties, and stronger trading between not only Armenia but maybe South countries as well, and with Russia. There is Iranian, Armenian, Georgian, and Russian regular working group, and they are working on north-south corridor integration in electricity trading. Just quick update that Armenia is constructing, Georgia and Armenia is constructing new power lines, and as you can see, this is 500, 400 kV lines, and Armenia itself is constructing with Iran new electricity transmission lines. This year was a very interesting year for Georgia because we basically transited electricity from Russia to Armenia and from Azerbaijan to Turkey simultaneously. This never happened before, and it tells that electricity trading in the region has potential. It's a small, very small volumes, but if we can develop strong mechanisms and we can harmonize our markets, give private sector opportunities to trade commercially, and that's what our aim is. There is much more things that can be done in terms of regional cooperation. Our aim, and also investors are looking to sell their electricity, whoever invests in Georgian electricity market, to west, more to Turkey, and we hope that Turkey will be stable country, and we also hope that we can use also our Turkish partners to transit our electricity to Eastern European countries as well. Basically, this was brief. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I will talk about energy policy of Poland and problems of energy security of Poland. Very briefly about this problem, while waiting for my presentation, but I will start now. I want to start with this strategy of national energy security of Poland that states that the main factors of energy security are availability of energy sources, including that located abroad. Okay, thank you very much. Diversity of the sources of energy and directions of the support. And for the construction of new power plants based on various technologies that will allow to sustain countries' consumption of energy. That's the theory, and now about the practice. Maybe take a look on the oil market in Poland. That's a good evidence of the current situation in Poland. So we still depend on the oil from Russia. It's about 90%. And other sources are Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Norway, and quite some domestic production. And oil pipelines in Central Europe. We can see that there is one main pipeline that goes from Russia through Belarus to Poland and then to Germany, and other pipelines via Ukraine and Czech Republic, and this pipeline omit Poland, of course. And now gas pipelines in Central Europe, so gas, there are also two gas pipelines that are omitting Poland, that's Nord Stream, and the second one via Ukraine to Czech Republic. And the most important for Poland, that's still a pipeline from Russia through Belarus. The situation has changed a lot because a few years ago, the oil from Russia in Poland made about 99%, 99% of the oil market. And now the situation is a little bit better. I will tell you why, but when we talk about the gas market in Poland, the situation seems to be better because one third is domestic production, 1/3 is production is imported gas from our Western partners, especially from Norway, and 1/3 is still Gazprom gas imported from Russia. The situation has changed in the last few years, but I will start with a general comment on Polish energy policy in the last 20 years. For a long time, Polish authorities were focused on the problem of the process of accessing to the EU and NATO, and we, how to say, we were convinced that EU and NATO will ensure supplies from Russia. So I don't mean that NATO or the European Union will help us to find the new sources, new partners, and new suppliers of the of resources, but rather to ensure stability of supplies from Russia. After that happened, three important facts. First of all, a gas conflict between Russia and Belarus, when Russia stopped to transfer resources through Belarus. After that, a gas conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And the third factor, very important, it was the decision of construction of the Nord Stream. This decision was considered as an evident lack of European security in the field of energy, and it forced Polish authorities to look for new approaches to this problem. And in 2005 and in the next year, in power was a right-wing party, Law and Justice, and this party changed the whole policy of Poland. I mean, the foreign policy and as well as energy policy, and decided to be and to pretend to be an equal partner for Russia, for Germany, and for another partners in Europe and the whole world. Of course, we should take into consideration that the potential of Poland is much smaller than for example, Russia or Germany, but nevertheless, Kaczynski brothers pretend to be an equal partner for them. And energy security was seen as a part of Polish politics towards our Eastern partners, Eastern neighbors, I mean Ukraine, Belarus, of course, Georgia and Armenia, Azerbaijan as well. But Poland pretends to be a leader of Eastern Europe. So these challenges which are related to the problems of energy security were merged with the total vision of new Eastern Europe of Polish authorities. So promoting democracy, promoting new standards, that was the priority, and it was, of course, combined and merged with the problem of energy security. So it was a clear message that Poland wants to develop cooperation with Azerbaijan, with Georgia, and other partners. But this clear message was that we do that against Russia. So first of all, we want to give up all connections with Russia. We are trying to propose and to promote new model of political regime, democratic regime in Central Europe, and it was accompanied by different actions aimed to diversify energy market in Poland. And among these tasks was first of all we start with interconnectors. That are new interconnectors with Germany, with Czech Republic, with Slovakia and Lithuania. So it was thought that they will ensure security, and Poland will import gas from our western and southern neighbors, but this is still Russian gas. We should remember. The second one, that was a construction of LNG terminal. It was opened last year. The current capacity is 5 BCM, and the plant is much bigger, and it will cover about half of Poland's demand per year. And now this LNG terminal is operating, and first contracts were signed with a company from Qatar, And the price, when we talk about price, is much higher than the regular price. I mean, the regular price, that's the price for the gas, which comes from Gazprom, and the price is about 265 USD per 1,000 of cube meters. The another attempt of diversifying sources was this idea of Lech Kaczynski to organize energy summits in various capitals of Eastern European countries. In Kiev, in Baku, in Poland, it was in Krakow. And it was a clear evidence that we want to cooperate not only on the field of economy, energy, but also in the political dimension and to promote democracy. I will repeat once again with a shadow of Russia. So these meetings, for example, like this one in Baku, was an evidence that Poland wants to promote own model of political, new political relations in Eastern Europe, and President of Azerbaijan was declared with the order of one of the highest order of merit, one of the highest orders of Poland. So it was also an evident political decision, and everything in this short period of when the law and justice was in power, it was a good opportunity to perform such project like Odessa Prodigy Gdańsk. So it was an interconnector, oil interconnector between Ukrainian city of Brody and Polish refinery in Płock. You can see this interconnector Adamowo, that's a small village not far from the Ukrainian-Polish border. And it will allow to purchase oil from Azerbaijan. I mean, from Baku, it will be transported to Supsa, and then by oil tankers to Odessa, and then by pipelines through Brody to Poland. This opportunity, this period was quite good for Poland because it was a good political atmosphere for this project. And but unfortunately, it wasn't realized, and the company, initially it was a Polish-Ukrainian company, Sarmatia, established in 2004, and now it operates under the name New Sarmatia. It's a joint venture of companies from Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine, Georgia, and Azerbaijan. But this pipeline still doesn't exist. You can ask me why. I don't know why, because I'm not a politician. I can only interpret some documents, but it is still a problem of Polish energy policy. The key import, the crucial part of pipelines in Poland still doesn't exist, and it means that we are still buying oil from Russia. And that's a problem of our politics. And when we talk about the role of South Caucasus countries in Polish energy policy, it is very limited role because we still don't have connection with Ukrainian pipelines. You know, we can see all these investments like LNG terminal, interconnections, we can consider as an insurance. We are buying insurance to feel more secure, but in fact, the threats are still the same. So like the situation here, we are investing money, spending money for LNG terminal, but still the threat is the same. What's the threat from the point of view of energy security? That's still resources, I mean oil and gas, flow through Belarus and Ukraine from Russia. There's also a small but interesting episode of shale gas in Poland. 6 years ago, a consulting company announced that in Poland there are big reserves of shale gas, about 700 of BCM, and this information for a short time changed everything in Polish thinking about energy security. But in the next years, it turned out that, in fact, these reserves are not so big. First of all, not so big, and secondly, it will be relatively expensive gas. The price of extraction, only of extraction, it was about $340 per 1,000 of cube meters. So many companies, like for example, ExxonMobil decided to give up with this project, and they are already abandoning Poland. So it means that shale gas is not a perspective for Poland, and we still depend on resources from Russia. And that's everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Rafał, thank you very much, and thank you for keeping to time. I'm sorry to hustle everybody. I'm going to go up and speak, and when I speak, I hope that all four of you will push your hands up when it's 4 minutes to go. Otherwise, they go on forever. Very simply, if you talk about the role of Turkey, start with the absolute basics. Yep. Simply a crossroads of pipelines. Major transportation set. Don't worry about these slides. They'll all be made available. Everything will be done, so you don't need to take the notes. This is standard history. Long-term issues, what have we got? A significant increase in the amount of gas that will transit Turkey. The point is, under what conditions, and above all, will there be the extra gas that has been for so long anticipated? The potential is clearly there. This is just one possible set of contributors to the Southern Gas Corridor in its expansion phase. And we've heard a lot about what is happening so far on the Southern Gas Corridor. Here it is. I love this slide. It's my favorite for one simple reason. It points out that this project is underpinned by actual sales contracts. You were asking about Odessa Prodigy and why it hadn't been concluded up as far as Poland. The answer was the commerciality wasn't there. It's not a political, you can have a political project, but it won't get completed. It's got to be both political and commercial. This is just indicating how much the costs have come down. You've still got $38 billion worth of project that is underpinned by commercial contracts. And now we get to the physical problems. This is really it. Once the peace process between the PKK and the Turkish state broke down in July 2015, this is what happened. 4 attacks on physical pipelines, 1 attack on a train carrying pipe to be used in the construction of TANAP. This simply indicates that the PKK regards pipes as a legitimate target. The last time I used it, the phrase here in Tbilisi, and said it was a war, I was immediately criticized by a Turkish diplomat for saying that. Point is, it's not my phrase. It's a phrase of the Air Force commander. That is what Turkey has in Southeast Europe, southeastern Turkey. And the point is, it's not the claims and counterclaims of casualties between the PKK and the Turkish state security forces. Those are almost impossible to verify accurately. It's the casualties that civilians are suffered. If 350,000 people had lost their homes in a 7-month period, it would be major news if it wasn't for the fact that just to the south in Mosul and Aleppo, even worse things were happening. Those are the sources for it. Now we come to the core issues. Kirkuk-Ceyhan line has had major outages, one of which we still do not know the origin for, and that was a three-week break. All one wants to say is that this, I will dwell on this. First of all, Turkey is not in a very happy situation at the moment. Increasingly authoritarian, a wave of arrests, the loss of judicial and educational independence, and you have the finance minister, the one person who has done more in recent years to restore Turkey's credibility, or the last person to restore Turkey's credibility, stressing that ties with the EU and democracy are important components in maintaining Turkey's economic credibility as a country for inward investment. This is somewhat different from the line being taken by President Erdogan, who is saying, please get rid of your dollars, buy Turkish lira, and we will trade with Russia in Russian rubles and Turkish lira. To which one could only argue, if he wants to try that, the chances of it improving Turkey's economy are not very good. I mentioned arrests. There's one set of arrests that are crucially important, those of the HDP leaders. There's a very good reason. Like many people, like NATO, like the Turkish state, I regard the PKK as terrorists. But you need negotiating partners. And the HDP was a very major potential and prospective, and at one point actual negotiating partner for the Turkish state in dealing with the Kurdish issue. Arrest the civilian leadership, which they have now done, and you destroy that. We came through 40 years of troubles in Northern Ireland. We didn't want to call it a war, but let's face it, it was one. And how did we end it? Of course, all the time, we talked to the people we condemned as terrorists through intermediaries and eventually more and more directly. It's not nice, it's not pleasant, but if you want to get a ceasefire and then that ceasefire to become a peace, very difficult compromises have to be made. So now what does this mean, current state of Turkey? Does it meet EU criteria for membership? No. Does it want to be an EU member? No. Does Turkey meet NATO criteria for membership? NATO is supposed to be, though it is not formally stated this, an alliance of democracies. And remember, there have been in the past dictatorships, the former Spanish and Portuguese dictatorships, for one, as members of NATO. But perhaps the more interesting question, which is never asked as far as I know, is Turkey interested in NATO? Or put it this way, is President Erdogan interested in NATO membership? Is it compatible with joining, for example, the Eurasian Economic Union? So now we go back to gas from Kurdistan, just saying there were a whole lot of problems, including threats from PKK-aligned groups against the gas from Kurdistan. And what has happened, essentially, very simply, 20 BCM potentially of northern Iraqi gas to Turkey, a lifeline for the Kurdish regional government of northern Iraq, is really, I think, off the table now. There was supposed to have been a tender for the relevant pipeline to connect issued in April. There's been nothing since then, no news whatsoever. And there are grave financial problems confronting the companies developing the upstream, including the Turkish Genel Energy. So what does this mean? You have to look, if you're Turkey, to Russia. So now you have the whole question of Turkstream. And I'll go right, I'm not going to go through the history of it, it's all been there. But I am going to make a couple of quick points. Stop here for a second. This is what Russia calls the Southern Corridor project. This is a massive project originally designed to deliver, let me get this right, 63 BCM of gas from the main unified Russian gas system down to the port of Anapa on the Black Sea. That was the 63 BCM that would go into South Stream. It was when this pipeline project faltered in July 2014 that plans for physically laying Turkstream, which had been South Stream, which had been expected to get underway, suddenly came to a halt. At the moment, that project then, was calculated at $22 billion. Now it's probably about 13 or 14 because of the collapse of the ruble. But that is a bloody big amount of money to spend. And the point is, some of that, perhaps half, has been built and therefore needs an outlet. That is why I think that Turkstream will be built. And I will come back to the specific route of Turkstream across the Black Sea in a minute or two. But right now I'm simply going to say, what are the consequences of Turkstream? Answer, 2 strings I think will probably be built. 2 strings simply means 2 parallel pipelines, each of just under 16 BCM. First one, straight substitute for a line going through Ukraine and coming down the Trans-Balkan line. Second one, 4 minutes, okay. Second one will go to the Turkish-Greek border. There's only one reason for that. You want to put gas into TAP. And the great delight of it is you don't need to specify that in advance because TAP is an open access pipeline. East Mediterranean, can't go into TANAP, too early to judge. Makes good political and commercial sense, but a little problem. Cyprus. We saw one of these maps. These are the 2 conflicting approaches as to what might potentially be boundary disputes in the region. Please note, they are not official claims. I very much doubt that either Ankara or Athens wants to raise official claims because they got very, very sore fingers when they tried to consider doing that over the Aegean. This is the last lot. Russia itself. A history of cut-offs and blackouts and changes. And then, I'll go back, tougher practices. Look at the difference that the annexation of the Ukraine, of Crimea, were it ever to be recognized, would mean. And now you see why it was very important for Turkstream to go outside Ukrainian waters. Because look how far over they extend. And very roughly, something like 2/3, 3/4, you'd have to work it out exactly, of potential Ukrainian waters are now seized by Russia, if Russia could exert authority. What does that mean in practice? It means 4 prospective fields can't be developed. Because if they were to be developed, if Russia were to attempt to develop it, and let's say just put only Russian companies in for that development, what would happen? Ukraine would sue and would win hands down in legal courts for compensatory damages. That's gas transit through Ukraine, just showing how important it is, but it'll come to an end. Not totally, because I suspect some residual supplies will go through after 2019, but not very much. But this is coming to the end. 2 more slides. This one here, We've had the reference to the 22nd of January 2006 explosions. It's the BTC one I'll focus on, very simply. We had an explosion 36 hours before the Georgian War. At the time, immediately dismissed by BOTASH as an accident. Subsequently reported a year later or so by BP as an act of terrorism. Finally, and if I get this right, December 2014, Bloomberg published a report indicating it was a cyber attack. There's only one power one knows of that has both the capabilities of launching that kind of attack and the desire or utility to do so. Remember, because that line of action, that line was out of action before war broke out in Georgia, the Russian move into Georgia, no matter how it came about in the intervening 24 hours, was not seen in the West as a Russian move to sever energy communications, because they had been severed already and the markets had already reacted. That's just the sources for the blast. So this is the very end. What are the conclusions? I think the risks to TANAP and the Southern Gas Corridor are potentially extraordinarily severe, not because of casual attacks on pipelines, but because of the potential for instability in Turkey. If Turkey's Kurds are no longer represented, sorry, I'll correct that, if Turkey's urban Kurds are no longer represented. And remember, you're talking of millions of Kurds who now live in the big cities of Istanbul and Ankara. Then you've got the rapprochement with Russia. What does that mean in terms of how Turkey views its role in energy? And lastly, you need insurance mechanisms. Enhanced physical security is an obvious one. So is diversified infrastructure in Europe, and that includes both the physical infrastructure of creating new pipelines, connections, but also the software, the regulatory side of coordination. You've got a massive gain from LNG from Atlantic and Gulf suppliers, though please remember markets mean, in fact, much of that gas has gone to South America rather than to Europe. And you do have a useful EastMed. But in today's real conclusion, in today's commercial environment, Europe can import as much Russian gas as it wants. It's a wonderful environment to import Russian gas. Gazprom has been forced into price competition. It may sell its gas supposedly linked to oil, but in practice, it sells it with discounts that very largely reflect gas-on-gas hub pricing within Europe. So it's great for Europe. But Europe needs to make sure it has a proper insurance in place should things go wrong. And that I'm not sure we have yet. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
I actually have a comment rather than a question. I think your observations about Turkish Stream and the Russian-Turkish energy rapprochement is a bit overrated, in the sense that you're talking about the Russian Southern Gas Corridor, and it's really crucial to understand what's going on with Gazprom's decision making. But the Southern Gas Corridor in Russia is not being built necessarily because they want to ship more gas to Europe or to Turkey. It was built initially, long ago it was planned, in order to divert some cash to certain oligarchs. If you look at the contracts very closely, you see that most of the contracts have been paid out to two big companies, one controlled by Mr. Gennady Timchenko, and the other ones to the Rothenberg brothers. And a lot of this money have already been paid out. But we miss another $9 billion that have not been paid out yet. In order to justify such an investment by Gazprom, which, by the way, has seen its market capitalization shrink 10 times over the last 2 years, then you see a justification to push through a project like Turkish Stream. So in that sense, I would say that Turkish Stream is possible, but not as a two-line thing. At maximum as a one-line, because that is the most that Gazprom can now master in terms of financing, if you think about it, and as demand on the other side. Who will buy the additional 16 BCM? I don't see anyone buying them. Turkey doesn't want to buy them. Turkey wants to buy maybe 16 BCM if this would reduce its transit risk for Ukraine. But apart from that, why would Turkey do it? Talking to Turkish officials, by the way, just a month ago.
Can I answer that question quickly?
Yeah.
Okay, very simply, you're quite right. Russian pipelines are a classic way for Russian oligarchs to make money. There is a rule that Western companies look to make profits for their countries or for their companies out of pipelines and the transit that they use. In Russia, it's the construction projects contracts themselves that generate the profits. But you don't put that physical size in for a local market that is less than a fifth of the size of the pipeline capacity you're building. That's an export terminal at Anapa. Now, it's not going to be 63 BCM, but it's certainly going to be enough for half of that. As for the two lines, I said quite specifically, the first line basically is a substitute. It replaces the 11 BCM that goes down the west, a little bit that goes to Greece, and perhaps a little bit of reversal back up to Bulgaria. It's the second string. That, I think, was designed because they thought a little bit extra would go to Turkey. But the key point is it is designed to end at Ipsala Kipoi, the junction point of TANAP and TAP. And at that point, TAP is built to carry not 10 but 20 BCM, and it has complete open access. That was the point. In other words, if anybody wants to supply gas specifically to Italy or to traditional Gazprom customers in or beyond Italy, Gazprom can supply them with, my reckoning, 10 to 12 BCM, and all it has to do, almost literally, is flick its fingers and ask for an open season. And it will have to get it, and there will be no competition for that capacity. They can count on it.
At what price? And this is the question. At what price?
At exactly the same price as anybody else. That's the point of competition in Europe. Gazprom will sell it at whatever price it needs to get into the market. And it will
be a losing project.
TAP will be thrilled to have it because TAP is going to be losing money anyway.
Yes.
So they'll be thrilled to have extra gas going through. The same with TANAP. Indeed, one of the points I didn't mention was, well, I'll go back.
Thank you, Mr. Vladimirov. I absolutely agree, because I don't remember who from Russian experts, but many, many years ago, called Russian projects as South Stream, or Nord Stream, or Dream Stream, as a kickback money lines, откатопроводы in the Russian language. So it's absolutely correct. And the next position, small remark concerning your point about commercial non-visibility of Odessa Prodigy Plotsk oil pipeline. It's from Russian propaganda. because several times, several teams, international teams, which was established last time under the umbrella of the European Commission in 2007, confirmed absolutely profitability of this line. And it was put into support by the European Commission for these projects, for this project. And fortunately, several, from my point of view, because my position in Ukrainian Uktransnafta as the deputy chairman of the board and co-director of Sarmatia at that time. Two main mistakes took place. One from Polish side, other from Ukrainian side. Reverse exploitation of Odessa Prodigy for Russian oil in 2004, and a redirection from Odessa to Plotsk to Brody Adamovo. This route means serious difficulties, serious challenges from point of ecological, because Nature 2000s, 5 directives of the EU, etc.
You're quite right. I'm only going to make one comment because we got another speaker. What was possible in an era of $100 oil is somewhat different now. And I will acknowledge quite freely there was a lot of Russian opposition and hostility to the project that ensured it never went ahead properly. But nonetheless, Ukraine building a pipeline without an end to it and without a connection into the Soviet system that it inherited, that was a very interesting choice.
Right. Well, was several brilliant points which John has delivered. And all of these points actually very much support the need of the Black Sea crossing by a pipeline. And this is also very much in line with the latest steps by European Commission to re-include back White Stream as a project of PCI. You have seen probably the language which they have included. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is George Niculescu. I'm from the European Geopolitical Forum in Brussels, and I have the honor to close the debates in this very distinguished gathering. And as usually, as a last speaker, I have to face two challenges at least. One, to say something that nobody else before me has said, and another, to be short enough in order not to blame me for keeping you from having your lunch and the afternoon program. I will try to face both challenges, and therefore I would like to move already to the first slide. From this slide, which is talking about the geopolitics of energy in the South Caucasus, I would like to focus on only one point, because there were other speakers before me, including Mr. Ceausescu in the opening of this panel, who made the point that the South Caucasus is, from a geopolitical point of view, is fragmented. And my point is that the current geopolitical fragmentation of the South Caucasus is evolving into increasing regional energy security fragmentation, while the protracted conflicts of the region will continue to reinforce this process. Without further talking about this topic, I would like to move to the most interesting part of my presentation, regarding the regional energy cooperation, security cooperation in the South Caucasus. And in order to do so, I would like to refer you to the research conducted recently by two groups of regional international experts in which I have been involved, who looked at this topic from different angles. First is the Regional Stability in the South Caucasus Study Group of the PFP Consortium of Defense Academies and Security Studies Institutes discussed this issue of regional energy community in the South Caucasus in two consecutive workshops this year. In the first workshop, the study group attempted to provide a framework for a regional energy resources regime that would be able to divorce energy from politics. However, all the speakers in that workshop thought that energy and geopolitics are bound to remain innately correlated in the South Caucasus. And this is because of the persistence of unresolved conflicts, because of the Russian double play and manipulative policies in the region, also the negative influences from the neighboring Middle East, where interests of regional powers are clashing, and finally, because of the undetermined international status of the Caspian Sea. However, the study group succeeded in coming up with a number of policy recommendations. However, these policy recommendations seem that in the absence of significant progress in Nagorno-Karabakh conflict resolution, few of these proposals may be implemented at intergovernmental level, while leaving most of the work to be done within multilateral formats or in track to diplomacy. Just to give you an idea about the kind of policy recommendation that this group has produced, they talked about regular South Caucasus Energy Experts Dialogue, and the Energy Charter Treaty might offer an initial regional framework for starting such a dialogue. They talked about opportunities to use joint management of energy and water resources as tools for conflict resolution, in particular in the case of Nagorno-Karabakh, while taking into account the positive experience with the Abkhaz-Georgian cooperation at the Inguri hydropower station, and also discussed about debating among civil society organizations on the use of energy as a geopolitical tool. Furthermore, in a post-conflict situation, other options might be open, such as establishing a South Caucasus Trust Fund to promote regional cooperation, including on energy markets integration, supporting investments in energy infrastructure, new fossil fuel technologies like shale, and in renewable energy sources. And also the idea to promote the privatization of energy industries in the South Caucasus countries. The second workshop aimed to cooperatively develop an embryonic regional organization to manage and resolve issues related to energy security in the South Caucasus. And here we looked at the development of region-wide energy infrastructure to generate, market, and distribute energy within and beyond the region. And here we focused on two areas, on the need to develop regional capability to handle energy transit emergencies, and the establishment of regionally administered trust fund to address energy price fluctuations. The policy recommendations of this second group have not been published yet, so I cannot disclose the details of the outcome of this second workshop. But what I would like to say, however, about this, the outcome of the second workshop highlighted the fact that participants agreed that the South Caucasus region provided the ground and opportunity for the creation of a post-conflict regional energy security organization that would be beneficial to each participating stakeholder, as well as to the region as a whole. Now, moving to the second to the second initiative, the second context in which we discussed regional cooperation. It was this, economic incentives as conflict resolution tools in the South Caucasus, the case of Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. And here, my organization in January 2014, the European Geopolitical Forum, started an in-depth investigation on whether economic incentives can provide a fresh approach towards conflict resolution in the Nagorno-Karabakh peace process. And we started from the assumption shared by a number of participants from regional organizations, but also international experts, by which we believe that economic incentives may work as conflict resolution tools if they are combined with a vision of an economically integrated South Caucasus and with a number of very broad and uncontroversial principles, including, the right of people to live in peace and security, shift from preparing for war to building enduring peace, good neighborly relations, right of all people to strive for economic prosperity, and the right of all IDPs and refugees to return to their homes and lands and live there in peace and security. This new approach to the role of economic incentives in Nagorno-Karabakh conflict resolution was widely discussed with regional and international experts over a series of EGF seminars held between March 2014 and July 2015. The conclusion was that there is a need to create a platform for exchange of information between Armenian and Azerbaijani experts on energy, transport, trade issues, the rehabilitation of territories affected by the conflict, and the return of IDPs to their homeland. And this economic dialogue could lead to the development of post-conflict scenarios for the whole Karabakh based on a roadmap leading towards an economically integrated South Caucasus. And to conclude my presentation, because I think my time is almost up, I would just say that the prospects for regional security cooperation in the South Caucasus are rather blurred and uncertain, and they will remain correlated with the prospects of continued geopolitical confrontation in this region. However, post-conflict energy security, regional cooperation scenarios can offer a sound framework for intra-regional confidence building and for developing blueprints that could be implemented in the future. They could also play an important role in South Caucasus conflict resolution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for trying to give us something that is optimistic in terms of conflict resolution, given the fact that you can hear such despairing speakers as me. And we actually do need someone who's prepared to stand up and say, bad things are not inevitable. There are ways in which we can tackle and we can look forward. And in that spirit, I hail George's reference to try to work on White Stream again. I don't know, Merman, whether you want to do a summing up?
Well, it is extremely difficult to sum up this conference with lots of very important, complicated topics that have been discussed. I think that we will try to repeat this thing in future by all means. It does not depend only on us, but I believe that the value is undoubtedly there, a huge value. I would say there are some unifying factors. Of course, we all want to be independent, we all want to be prosperous, and we want to develop. And there are challenges, and those challenges need to be addressed, and our first of all, exchange of ideas and thoughts, finding the ways of cooperation. This is something that can contribute to the better future of all our countries. And I don't know, I would remind certain things that are maybe not very positive. First, we could not get Turkish participants here. It may be an accident, I don't know, because we had at least 3 people willing to come then who could not come because of different reasons. One had some health problem, another had some other problems, and so on and so on. That's another thing is that you know, I would recall Putin's recent appearance on TV when he was asking a little boy where do Russia's borders end, and the statement was that Russia has no borders. It was a joke, then he said. It was a very good joke that we need to have in our minds. Because what I want to try to emphasize many times, it's not about the really borders, it's about values that are being spread out, that penetrate all our countries and that undermine basically our freedom if it happens that way. And another recent, just I saw on internet, my colleagues showed me, statement by Turkish Prime Minister telling that Turkey and Russia have to define the role of the countries in the region. And I pretty much believe that that region also does not, is not only this territory between Russia and Turkey. It will have wider consequences as well. So therefore, I think it is time to mobilize positive thinking, to mobilize cooperation opportunities, to mobilize information spreading as far as possible, and to mobilize ourselves in our respective communities. So, and I hope that our workshop at least contributed a little bit to that. I'm very thankful to organizers and sponsors of this conference, to Gražvydas from Lithuanian and other Lithuanian colleagues, for the opportunity of inviting this outstanding pool of experts. And we are very much looking forward for further extended cooperation, further extended contacts. And I believe pretty much that we have a lot of things to do, and hope that others will join in this. So thank you very much to everybody.